Thanks for allowing us to see another day. Amen.
Sweaty.
We'd also like to thank the pastors of this church, Dr. Joseph L. Williams, who's our senior pastor. We'd also like to thank Pastor Emeritus Jasper Williams Jr. Dr. Joe and the 40-day turn-up and the journey is in direct coalition with Canaan Farms. Back in 2016, we began to plant fruit trees. We have 35 fruit trees here in the garden that range from apple trees, pear trees, fig trees, persimmon trees, plum trees, nectarine, peach trees. All of these were phase one of Canaan Farms. Phase two, as you see, is our in-ground garden, which consists of watermelons, zucchini, yellow squash, blueberry trees, pomegranate trees. We also have okra, green beans. We also have corn that we grew this year, tomatoes, and another assortment of fruits and vegetables. Now, this garden would not thrive unless God breathed upon it. The pastors had a vision, and the fantastic volunteers that you see behind me come together as one. So that's why we are here today. Our partners here at Food Well Alliance and also the Atlanta Botanical Gardens is going to give us some tips on how to maintain, microgarden, and keep pests out of your garden. We're going to turn it over to Flannery right now. Come on over, Flannery. Give her a hand.
Thanks, Fred. Hey, y'all. We're very excited to have you guys out here today. I'm Flannery. I work with Food Well Alliance, and we're a nonprofit that supports community gardens, farms, and orchards around Metro Atlanta. So we work with this network of community-supported, community-run spaces that are producing food in their neighborhoods. We have a variety of resources that we offer, but working with Fred, we've had volunteer work days out here. I think we've done compost giveaways out here for the garden, and then today we're excited to bring you the Plant, Eat, Repeat series. So this is a workshop series that started in 2019, and we've been doing educational workshops with the Atlanta Botanical Garden at different community gardens around the city since that time. And if you like what you learned today, you can check out our website, and we have a whole backlog of past topics, so you can learn some more. But without any further ado, I will turn it over to Brandon, who will be talking about integrated pest management.
Thank you, Flannery.
Let's give him a hand.
Thank y'all, and good morning to y'all. My name is Brandon Bronis.
please.
I'm the Community Programs Coordinator with the Atlanta Botanical Gardens, and one of the jobs that I have a pleasure of doing is actually teaching this Plant, Eat, Repeat workshop series throughout the entire year for different community gardens and community farmers. Today, we are going to be talking about integrated pest management. Can I get a show of hands of anybody who knows what integrated pest management is? Right there? Perfect. This is the place to be because we're going to be learning about it today. So without further ado, as Flannery is saying, let's talk a little bit about what integrated pest management is. Each of y'all have a handout. That's just going to be kind of a cheat sheet for everything that we're going to cover today in terms of information and topics. Very, very detailed conversation. Tap on a couple really big points for y'all today. And like any good farmer, any good gardener, there's going to be some work involved with this on y'all's part later on. Actually a test, so I'm glad y'all showed up. Kidding, there will not be a test. Okay, so integrated pest management, also known as IP, is sustainable. So I want you, when I say sustainable, things, insects, anything. It's a decision-making process that uses information based on what we know about the pest biology, environmental data, and technology to manage pest damage in a way that both minimizes economic costs and the risks to people, property, and environment. That is the textbook definition of what IPM is. So essentially what I'm telling y'all today is we're going to learn different methods that we need to implement to keep damage to your crops, damage to yourselves and others, the environment at a minimum by using these techniques that we're going to talk about today. We're really going to focus on a lot on insects today. We'll tap into some diseases that affect plants. But our big topic today is going to be on insects, both beneficial and pests. So IPM, we use that knowledge that we know about biology of insects. I am not an entomologist, so I cannot speak to the scientific information that is bugs or insects. There's a lot of information on there where you can look at some of the websites are provided for you that's going to give you a little bit more basic detail knowledge. I'll talk a little bit about some of the pest features that you should be looking for when you're looking at crops and whatnot as well. But for the most part, I'm not going to dive into the entomology of all the insects we're going to talk about today, because that is several college courses that I don't even have the experience to talk about. We also talk about the biological and environmental factors. We need to monitor and we need to respond to problems with pests with management tactics and technologies that are designed essentially to accomplish these few goals with IPM. We want to prevent unacceptable levels of damage. I use the word unacceptable. Unfortunately, no matter what you use, even with the worst pesticides, you're not going to get rid of every single pest that's going to be in your garden. So we want to cut down on the amount of those. We want to make sure that it's an acceptable level to you. Whether you're selling your produce or you're using it at home or you're giving it away, we want to make sure that you decide what is an acceptable level of pest that's going to be on your produce. We also want to minimize the risk to people, property, infrastructure, natural resources, and the environment. I want to emphasize the environment on that. A lot of pesticides, folks love to use pesticides to get rid of things, from even mosquitoes, those are considered pests, to anything else in the garden. A lot of pesticides do a lot of damage not only to the insects that they're used on, but also the environment, which will then cause problems for yourself as well. So we're going to focus on using like natural, organic methods with pesticides if we decide to use a pesticide on our pest problem. Any questions so far? Awesome, okay. We also want to reduce the evolution of pest resistance to the pesticides and other pest management practices. That is essentially saying we cannot use pesticide all the time, because bugs are very adaptable. They will learn that you're using a certain type of pesticide in a couple generations, couple years, they're going to be resistant to it. You can spray it all you want, but they're still going to be there. So we have to implement many different tactics to, I don't want to say attack the bugs, but essentially to attack the pests that are going to be in our gardens, okay? So this is like a multi-pronged approach to using the management of the pests. So there's several different tools that we'll use in our tool belt for that. IPM typically is going to have many different ways to do that, from mechanical controls, which would be just as simply as like pulling a bug off your plant, to biological controls like using beneficial insects, or even just chemical controls, which is always going to be a last step before we do anything else. So that's the biggest thing I want you to take away today. Pesticides should be like your last step to be using on pests in your garden. You want to exhaust every other method, and if you still have like a huge swarm of pests on your crops and plants, then that's when you should decide to use a pesticide. There are 5 components to IPM. The first of which is pest identification. This is where we become both entomologists on our own and detectives. When we have to look up things, we have to contact our county extension offices, which there's a link at the very bottom of your page. Well, you'll look up that link on your paper, and then it'll give you the county listings of all the extension agents throughout the state of Georgia. So depending on what county you're on, click that link, find your extension agent, and if you have any questions about like pests in your garden, or if you have any questions about like what pesticides or anything else you should use, that's a really good tool. I also put some cards out for y'all as well. You can contact me and I'll do my best to help you out with that as well. The other component in IPM is going to be prevention. This is the main one we want to focus on today. Prevention is going to be your best friend in stopping pests from even getting into your garden. That's the most effective way to deal with pests. The next component is monitoring. Again, this is also going to be a step where you become a detective. You're going to make sure that you're taking notes. If you are a gardener, beginning or even experienced, every presentation that I've done so far in our Plant, Eat, Repeat series, I've always said you should have like a notebook as a gardener or farmer. The first thing you should do in the morning after you have your coffee is go out, look at your garden, and you want to make sure that if there's anything that's changed for the good or bad, you take detailed notes on that. You think you'll remember in September, like, oh, in March, my garden looked this way, but you won't. Lots of things are going to progress and transpire in that meantime. So make sure you're taking detailed notes on that. And then the last two processes are going to be control actions. These are when we actually take steps to stop pests, invasions of our crops and plants. And then finally, evaluation. You're going to evaluate everything that you did, determine if it worked or not, and then you'll continue on from there, either improving upon that or trying something else or continuing with it. This is one thing about IPM not a lot of people understand. This is a cyclical process that it continues on and on and on. It's a never-ending process to making sure that your garden is essentially pest-free. You want to make sure that you are constantly acting in different ways to prevent pests in your garden. Any questions so far, y'all? Yes? Yes, IPM is also known as Integrated Pest Management. You're very welcome. So that's just, again, is just a science-based process on making sure that the ecosystem around us is doing well, essentially. All right, so what is a pest? We talk about that. A lot of times people go into our garden and see a bug and assume that it's a pest. That is not always the case. There are many beneficial insects that we want in our garden, from bees to butterflies to even certain types of beetles, such as ladybugs. These are going to be things that you want in your garden. But pests, by definition, are organisms that damage, interfere with desirable plants in our fields, orchards, landscapes. These can be organisms that are that impact your health for humans or animals. They can transmit disease. They can also be things like weeds. They could be birds, mice, deer. They could be ticks, mites, snails, nematodes, which are microscopic worms, and they could be even bacteria, fungus, or viruses. Or they could even be your grandbaby who's going in your garden and eating sugar snap peas before you can harvest them. We have control methods for that as well. So it just depends on what you decide is a pest in your own garden, okay? So when we're thinking about the IPM, again, the first phase is going to be identifying your pest. This is what I like to call the learning phase. You want to be able to identify the pests that are in your garden and versus what is going to be a beneficial insect. So the things that we need to learn about identifying pests, we need to learn the physical features. What kind of bug is it? There are lots of different types of bugs to really be paying attention to. There are things called true bugs. Those are going to be the bugs that essentially, when they are born, they look like tiny miniature versions of themselves. So let's say grasshoppers are a true bug. Aphids are a true bug. But then we have things such as caterpillars, which go through a metamorphosis and they transform into something different. So you want to make sure that you know what you're looking at when you identify your pests. What is it? You want to know how many are there. That's another important thing. You want to go into your garden and you want to be able to count and see the number of pests. And if you decide that is a lot of pests for you, for your personal garden or your personal growing space, then that is something that you need to take care of. Also, I want to point out that I'm talking a lot about gardens and farms and growing spaces. You don't actually need to have a garden this size or even like a backyard plot to do gardening and whatnot. You can do what's called micro farming or micro gardening, and you could easily grow herbs on your windowsill in like little pots. So you can grow like mint, rosemary, everything like that on a windowsill as long as it gets sunlight, or you can even grow in like potted containers in your garden as well. If you have a patio space and you have room for a couple of pots, you can put some tomatoes in there, you can put some other things, and you can still be a gardener and get a nice yield. So I don't want to ever deter anybody if they're like, I don't have the space or I can't get into a community garden. You can definitely grow. All you need is a little bit of sunlight and a little bit of hope, and you can do it. And you don't even need sunlight. You can buy grow lights, and that'll help you a little bit too. You also want to learn about pests, like what type of damage they do. There are different types of insects that do different things. For instance, there are insects that are going to be kind of like sucking insects. So they're going to pierce things, such as like the leaves, fruit or anything like that, and suck out nutrients. There are going to be pests who actually chew and bite into it, and you'll see those. There will be pests that actually like eat at the bottom of plants, like the root systems and things like that, or the actual fruit or even the foliage. So knowing the difference between that is what's going to help you identifying the pests. You also want to know how often this is going to be a problem. Is it something that happens every single year, every single month? Is it a pest that only shows up every 3 years? What kind of cycle is this pest going through that I need to really focus on, and if I need to even act on that pest at all? Let's see. We also want to know the pest life cycle. So a lot of pests such as aphids, I think a lot of people probably have dealt with aphids at their point if they've ever done any gardening. Certain beneficial insects eat aphids at different stages of their life, whether they be like nymphs, larvae, when they're adults, eggs. You need to know like when you want to actually enact a program of IPM at the life stage, because a lot of times if it's the egg stage, it's a little easier to handle, but once they hatch from the eggs and they become nymphs and they're taken over, it's a little bit more difficult to actually do any basic control to that. You also want to learn about the natural enemies of insects. So we'll talk a little bit later about how we're going to attract beneficial insects to the garden, but there are bugs that you really want to know and really want to befriend in your garden. A few of them I like to list are lady beetles, also known as ladybugs. Everybody knows those. They're voracious eaters. They eat pretty much anything. You want to attract ladybugs to your garden. There are things like ground beetles, tiger beetles, parasitic wasps, which is a really interesting insect to attract to your garden. Parasitic wasps, essentially, for better or worse, they lay their eggs in caterpillars, and then their eggs will eat the caterpillars that are destroying your garden. So you want to attract those. As terrifying and awful as that sounds, they're actually very, very beneficial to your garden. There's also assassin bugs and green lacewing bugs. Those are also going to be very, very attractive to your garden in terms of attacking any pests. So these are the kind of bugs that we want in our garden. So I highly recommend going online at some of the bug information that I've given you and looking at pictures of these bugs. I have pictures of pests, and I'll show you those later, but in terms of like the beneficials, highly, highly recommend checking those out online to get familiar with those. Also, another factor that you want to do in terms about learning, you want to learn about your landscape. If you have a garden that's near like small puddles of water and stuff like that, you're probably going to have like mosquito issues. You want to make sure that wherever you plant your garden, it's going to be beneficial for you and it's not going to actually attract more pests to you. So if you like went somewhere where there are tons and tons of squirrels and you already know that and you plant a garden there, those squirrels are going to come into your garden and eat it. So you want to avoid that. And they are pests. Squirrels are probably one of the biggest pests in the garden. Any questions so far?
I have a question about squirrels.
Yes, 1 second, Fred. Yes.
So, I mean, it's not like they only go certain places. They're like everywhere in Georgia.
Yes.
So how do you deal with them?
Well, there's lots of different ways that you can do that. There are like measures that you can use in terms of like keeping squirrels out of the gardens, kind of like row covers or anything else like that. You can have traps. My personal method is dogs. I just let my dogs in the backyard where my garden is, and they don't go back there. So that's a great way to do that, but there are also other over-the-counter, or I shouldn't say over-the-counter, but there are other ways that you can purchase things for that. And there are also like certain things like, I think, like chili peppers and other natural ways to use in your garden to deter squirrels from actually coming in there.
My biggest issue with them is my pear tree.
Yes, yes.
And, my pear tree is huge. So even like if you're trying to put wire and stuff around it, they utilize the other trees to jump.
Yes, yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes. I will say this also, we live in an ecosystem that is full of like predatory birds. Hawks are a great option to like, if you can make a kind of ecosystem friendly to hawks or owls, or if you have those trees, typically those will also deter squirrels from coming into your garden. So just having like a little bit of fear for the squirrel is enough to keep them out of the garden. But I'm going to be honest with you, they're going to be a pest no matter what, but we can reduce the number of that just based on like other control factors that we can do. There is a link on there that refers to the Georgia Handbook for Gardeners. If you go on there, there's a link where it asks for like home gardeners, and it will show you different pests, different ways to deal with those pests. Specifically, squirrels is on there, so there's all kinds of methods to deal with them. Yes, sir.
Yeah, that was part of the same question. I've also heard that marigold, the flower
Yes, sir.
marigold, is good to plant around your garden to keep deer and squirrels away. So is that true or false? Or
No, that's perfectly true. There are tons of like beneficial companion planting flowers that you should do. Like for instance, marigolds are really good at deterring a lot of different things, as well as working as kind of a trap plant. Trap plants are typically things that you'll plant alongside your garden that will attract the pests to go to that instead, or also just to keep like certain pests away because they don't like the smell. Marigolds is really good to companion plant with a lot of different things, specifically like tomatoes and things like that. But marigold is like one of those really magical flowers that has a lot of really great purposes. And I highly recommend companion planting marigolds in your garden if you don't already have those. Yes.
So I have
Yes, yes.
okay. So would I have to plant the marigolds in the same pot, or can it be in a different pot?
Whichever you prefer. If you want to do something like a little bit more like container garden friendly, if you have like a bigger container, you can add different layers and levels of different flowers in there for you as well. Or you can just do the marigolds separately in like a flower box nearby. But keeping them closer is probably going to be a good option for you. Yes. Yes, okay, thank you for asking that question. That is a very, very good question. So I'm gonna skip a little ahead and talk about the beneficials right now. Beneficials, you can definitely buy those online, and you can definitely buy those from like a retailer. However, unless you are growing inside like a greenhouse or any other contained environment where you're growing, it's very difficult to keep those insects happy, fed, and in that space. So if you're outside like here, they're probably gonna move if there's not enough food. So you're gonna lose, you can buy 200 ladybugs and maybe 50 will stay, which isn't a bad thing. But then you also have to think about the fact that like you're buying these insects that are being lab raised, and they're not used to the Georgia heat. They're not used to the humidity. They're not used to the predators that are out here, so they might die off. So in that sense, instead of buying it, I think you should buy like beneficial plants that are actually going to support the beneficial insects to come in. So things like things in the aster family, or even actually the carrot family. So if you get things like carrots, Docus, hold on, I got all kinds of lists for you on this. So if you buy things like coriander, dill, fennel, once they begin to flower, one, they're gonna act as a trap plant. They're gonna invite pests over there, but they're also gonna attract those beneficial insects. So then they're gonna find ways to actually like live in your space and be happy there to eat the pests, if that makes any sense. So you wanna attract things. You wanna plant things that are gonna be beneficial to not only bringing pollinators, but also bringing beneficial insects as well. Let's see, okay. Any other questions regarding, sweet, all right.
I have a question.
Yes.
I have a little garden on my porch. It's screened in, but I've noticed these little black little things be flying all around. What are those? How do you get rid of those?
Those could be fungus gnats. I wouldn't be able to actually identify them unless I saw them, if you had a picture or anything like that. It might be fungus gnats, which could be the fact that maybe you're overwatering your plants, and that they're making their home in the wet soil. It's still damp, and so they're like building and flying out of that. It just depends on what the insect is. So a great way to do this is to catch it if you can. Yeah, right? It's gross. So if you can catch the insect, get a picture of it, identify it, you can either go and look at any of these resources, but I suggest that you contact a county extension agent. They typically are very well versed on the entomology of insects, and they're there to help you regardless if you have a farm or a garden, or if you're just doing patio gardening as well. But they will be able to identify it a lot easier and give you exact, a prescription, if you will, to how to remedy those. So typically I would always say, if you don't know what it is right away, try to catch it if you can, get a picture of it as close as possible, and then contact the county extension agent, and they will have like a list of remedies to get rid of that. Yes, sir. Yeah, no, you're doing it absolutely right. A lot of times, wood chips also a great home for ladybugs, so you're actually creating a space for ladybugs to live in that. And it's also a great way to suppress any kind of viruses or diseases that are in the soil. A lot of times when folks water their plants, they do it overhead, and then like the soil will splash up, get on the plant, and that's what causes a lot of diseases, funguses, and things like that for you. So by watering at the roots, like at the base of the plant, or having kind of those suppressants from the soil keeping things down, that's a great way to kind of avoid all that. Awesome. These are good questions. Maybe just throw this away and we just do a question session for y'all right now. So other things to do in your garden to kind of counteract pests. This is where we actually start doing cultural practices. These are the tools that we're going to utilize to actually keep pests out of the garden now. One of which is cultivars. This is a great way to keep pests out because this is a prevention method. The cultivars that you're trying to use are going to be hardy, pest-resistant, disease-resistant seeds and plants. So you can actually go on like seed sites like Johnny's or anywhere else like that to purchase a specific variety that is going to be resistant to known diseases and pests here. Or you can even do, like with that, you want like a vigorous, healthy host plant that is going to either be resistant to the pests or it can handle a lot of pests and it's still going to produce fruit. There are lots of great varieties for that, or you can use cultivars as trap plants, as I was saying earlier. I believe there is a variety of squash called the Blue Hubbard squash that is a great trap plant for a lot of pests that go for your squash. It's a beautiful, beautiful like light blue colored squash that is absolutely fantastic to use, but bugs love it. It's going to go for that. If you plant that further away from your crops, there are going to be bugs who are going to be attracted to that, and that's a great option for you instead of actually using pesticides. Just having something that the bugs can have, they'll leave the rest of your stuff alone with. You can also do planting based on time. A lot of things you can do with that is companion planting, as we were talking about. Companion planting with certain like marigolds, the fennel, the dill, all those things will bring like beneficial insects to you, but they also provide barriers to any other pests. You also want to probably adjust spacing and pruning and like general maintenance in your plants when you are doing this. A lot of times if you're seeing like aphids, whiteflies, or anything like that, you're not getting a lot of circulation or air through that. So what you will probably want to do is just trim some limbs off your tomato plant or just create a little bit more space so air can flow through there, and that's a great deterrent for a lot of pests as well. Oh yeah, so disrupting plant behaviors is another, or excuse me, disrupting pest behaviors is another great way at stopping pests from in your gardens. When I say that, I mean crop rotation, changing where your garden is throughout the times you garden every season. If you keep things in the same place, bugs are going to remember that. They're going to keep coming back to that. But if you switch up your garden just a little bit, it's going to confuse them and they're not going to know where the food is. So that's a great way to do that as well. You also, crop rotation is great for cultivating soil as well. There's going to be a lot of pests that are going to be in your soil. I know a lot of people want to go through no-till methods for that, and you can do that if you want to be a gardener farmer, but there's a lot of great things in like tilling and just creating a healthier soil and getting the pests out of there for you. Water management is another thing that you can culturally practice to make sure there are less pests. So if you got like a leaky hose that's leaking water, that's providing sustenance for all kinds of pests to go for that. Mosquitoes find those small puddles. So if you fix your water or you just have a certain place where water is only available and nowhere else, that's a great tactic to kind of slow down pests. If you do have like standing water in your garden or growing space, does anybody know about mosquito dunks? Has anybody used mosquito dunks? They're really cheap. You can buy them at any hardware. They almost look like little donuts. They're a bacteria that you actually throw in like a pond or water where the larvae of mosquitoes are going to kind of like form and be born. So if you throw those in there instead of actually spraying for mosquitoes like a lot of people do in the Atlanta area, you're actually going to stop mosquitoes from forming a lot faster and still protecting the environment around you. So mosquito dunks are something I highly recommend if you're having a mosquito problem. They're really, really cheap and very great for the environment. Correct, yes. And they, you can either get them in like bits too, like there's mosquito bits, but then the dunks are gonna be like little small circular donut looking things that are really helpful. And then also just sanitation practices are another great way to avoid pests and diseases. So that means sharpening your tools and cleaning your tools, as well as just keeping like your space clean. So if you have like wet pots just thrown out in your garden or in your growing space, pick those up, move those so that no pests such as like rats or anything else can make a home there. So if you make an environment that's not friendly to your pests, that's very beneficial to you keeping them out of your garden. Sanitation practices and like with your tools, I always say that like if you are cutting tomatoes or doing anything else, keeping a little bottle, a spray bottle like this with alcohol in it, and cleaning your tools after each cut, it seems like a lot of work, but it does prevent a lot of diseases from spreading. And then also your tools need to be sharp. If you have any cutting tools that are kind of blunt, you're creating a more bigger wound on the plant that's going to be more susceptible to the diseases and pests to come in. So having something sharp and clean that's just cutting right through it, it's going to be a really clean incision. It'd be totally fine for y'all. Think about like getting surgery. If your doctor was using something that was like a butter knife to do surgery, it's going to be very painful and cause a lot of problems. So you want to make sure that your tools are up to date and safe. Any questions about that? No? All right. I know this is a lot of information and the sun is beaming down on y'all, so I want to make sure that y'all get it, but feel free to ask questions about anything. I'm here for y'all. The next phase is the observe phase and the monitoring step in IPM. This is where you become your best detective self. This is where you become Annalise Keating, and well, she's a lawyer, but this is where you actually pay attention to stuff. So you're going to scout for the pests. A great way to do that is sticky traps. You can buy those at any plant store, or you can just even walk around your garden. I suggest doing it at least twice a week to just like pay attention to all the different things going on in your garden. You want to make sure that you're looking at pretty much everything. So looking under leaves, looking at the base, looking in crevices, pay attention to every detail of your plants. This is going to make you a better gardener, a better grower as well, just because you're going to know what's going on there. So if like one day you notice a little bit of wilt, you're like, what is that? And then like you expect it and you notice that there may be like white flies or something else, you know what to do with that. Yes? Correct.
Just a couple of days ago, I kind of bent down, I had potatoes. And I started looking at these, because potatoes are very green. And I'm like, what's that brown stuff on it? When I got closer and looked at it, it was like slugs. So I literally had to go in and check the slugs on. So how do you handle slugs?
Yeah, there's a couple different methods to do get rid of slugs. When they're did you already harvest the potatoes and you pull them out?
No, not yet.
Okay. So there's a couple methods that you can use for slugs and other soft-bodied creatures. There are things called beer traps where you can just easily like take a little bit of beer yourself, cut the can, and then leave it exposed, and then the bugs can actually, or the slugs can actually go into the beer and they'll go inside and drown because I think they're attracted to the yeast. You can use something called diatomaceous earth, which is a powder. When you use any kind of powder or any substance, you want to make sure that the weather conditions are right. So if it's wet or raining, since it's a powder, it's not going to be effective. But if you use it on a drier time, kind of later in the evening, and you put like a ring of diatomaceous earth around your plants, the slugs are going to crawl through that, and that's going to suffocate them and kill them. So there are lots of different options that you can do for that. You can also kind of have more predators, like birds, who will eat the slugs in your garden. So inviting them, like having a bird bath or something like that around, might be a good option for you as well. So things that you need to monitor over time. You want to make sure, note of the location of your plants. You want to make sure that you know the number of pests. You want to identify the key hosts of the plants that you're actually growing. And you want to identify any of the type of existing damage that is on your plants. So again, just making note of like, is this a bite? Is this like a sucking damage on the plant? What kind of damage is it, so that you can identify the pest? And then you're going to keep those records. That's also a very important note. You always have this notebook, and you're going to keep records of everything that's going on in your garden, so you can refer to it in seasons later down the line to see if you're still having those same problems and things that you can do. The fourth phase is intervention. This is where we use our control actions, mechanical controls. Mechanical controls can be anything from traps, barriers, or screens. So if you have row covering, this is just like a fabric that goes over the crop so nothing can actually get in, such as squirrels or anything else like that. And then we also have things such as just easily going in with your fingers and squishing bugs, or a lot of times a great way when you're walking around your garden is to get like a cup of water with a little bit of dish soap and just picking beetles that are pests off of it and throwing it in there. They're going to drown, and that's a quick, efficient way to actually clear up a lot of pests. That's the way, if you ever had Japanese beetles in your garden, on your basil or something like that, that's one of the quickest ways to get rid of them. You also want to use things such as like pheromones. Pheromones can actually deter or attract certain things to your garden, so that's a good option. And then biological controls. This is, again, where we're talking about like our natural enemies of pests. So the beneficial bugs we talked about. Again, I talked about the carrot family. Those are things that you want to grow to attract certain things like parasitic wasps as well as parasitic flies. So again, caraway, coriander, fennel, Queen Anne's lace. These are really great in attracting beneficials to you. The aster family, these are going to be Asteraceae. So anything that is almost a native flower. So like coneflower, coreopsis, also known as blanket flower, cosmos, and marigolds. You also have yarrow. These are going to attract ladybugs as well as other beetles that are going to be beneficial to your garden. You can also grow things like legumes. So if you have clover, sweet clover specifically, fava beans in your garden, again, attracting things to actually eat the pests for you. And then mustards. A lot of brassicas are really, really good at attracting beneficials. However, there's a caveat because they also attract pests to your garden. So if you have some extra mustards that you want to put somewhere to get pests to go to that, that's a great option. So things like broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cauliflower, kohlrabi, these are really, really going to do great things for you in your garden. And then you also want to have a food and shelter source for your beneficials. So again, like having a bird bath or even like small water sources that aren't going to be attracting to mosquitoes are going to bring those beneficials to you. There's actually things that you can buy online called bee cups that are very small, like thimble size, that you put in your garden that feed bees, and those will also feed beneficials as well. The only negative I can say about like the biological control is the fact that it takes a long time before those actually take into effect. But it is one of the more better ways to go about it if you want to do that besides prevention. Lastly, let's talk about chemical controls. That's why we're all here. Chemical controls should always be a last resort for you in your garden. A lot of chemicals, even if they're organic, are very wide. They throw out a wide net of things that they destroy in your garden, even beneficials, like bees and things like that. If you're using certain things, they may really, really hurt the things that you want in your garden, so you have to be very careful about what you're using. I always say, read every label front and back and follow it to the T. That's the only way that these things are actually going to be beneficial to you, is if you're following the instructions as they are written for the plant, for the bugs. And so, such as this is BT. Sometimes you'll see it in stores called Dipel. That's like the brand name, I believe. But BT controls things like worms and caterpillars. And so you spray this, it does not harm anything else in your garden except these worms and caterpillars. So it's a great thing to use. However, like once it's sprayed on the plant and say a tomato hornworm eats that, they can't digest that, and essentially they kind of explode and they're gone. It doesn't hurt pets, it doesn't hurt people, but there are probably some beneficials that would probably get affected by this, so you don't want to use this too often, as well as the other things that I have here for you today. So that's all I have about like the different types of control methods that we can actually use for it. The last phase is actually, again, just evaluating what you've done the entire time, looking over your notes, talking to an extension agent and getting that information. You want to make sure that there is biodiversity in your garden. So there are tons of flowers, tons of plants that are available to both beneficials as well as bad insects. And then you want to make sure that you treat it with the things that it needs. So again, if you are going to use chemical controls, using things that are very specific to your garden and the plants that you're using. So that's all that information. Y'all probably came here to talk about bugs and how to get rid of those. So I have a few bugs for a few different plants that I would like to talk to y'all about that keep y'all on your toes when you're in your garden. The first of which, let's talk about squash. Has anyone had any problems with squash bugs in their garden? Every year, yeah, they are awful. There's lots of different ways to get rid of squash bugs. I'm gonna see if I have a picture of that for you. Okay, yeah, actually right here. So I have a picture of a squash bug. I don't know if y'all can see that right there, but it's gonna be the bottom one right here. This is a potato beetle, also a pest, also annoying, you can get rid of. But with squash bugs, what you wanna do, This is going to target pretty much cucurbits. It's going to target your squash, pumpkins, cucumbers, things such as that. You're going to see damage on it. It's going to suck out the nutrients from leaves. The last time I was here, I don't know, is Miss Joyce here? There's Miss Joyce. Miss Joyce and I, we were walking through the squash and we saw squash bugs, eggs in there. I don't know if you actually were able to get rid of them, but one of the methods to getting rid of them is literally just taking your thumb, squishing the eggs, and getting rid of them that way.
Yeah.
It can be gross, or you can do something else. You can use like a insecticidal soap, neem oil, or horticultural oil. Those are really great treatments for that. When you treat plants, especially using these ingredients, I always say to do these either later in the afternoon or closer to the evening. One, because bees are active during the day, in the morning. You don't want to spray any of this stuff because that's going to kill your bees and your beneficials. Using it later in the evening, this is typically when the pests, a lot of pests are going to be out. So that way it's going to be a little bit more effective. More organic methods such as these typically don't last as long as chemical pesticides that are terrible for your garden, but they do work really well in terms of like keeping the ecosystem safe. What other bugs do we have? So we have squash bugs. We have white flies. White flies are absolutely terrible. I'm sure you've seen those in a garden before. They usually come between mid and late summer, and they transmit a lot of diseases as well as just causing a lot of damage to plants. You could use such things as like a insecticidal soap on that. You could use host plants, but it just depends on the crop. And again, using the Georgia Pest Management Handbook, the link that I gave you, is going to have very specific details on how to deal with those on specific plants. It's going to give you the measurements. It's going to give you like everything that you need to use those pesticides if you go that route with these bugs. Has anyone had any problems with downy mildew or powdery mildew before? Okay, downy and powdery mildew is not a fun thing to deal with in terms of your garden. It's a fungus essentially that's going to grow on your plants. Typically comes out when it's hot and really rainy, so we should be seeing some very soon. Great ways to get rid of that is using like a fungicide. You can do that, or you can actually do other control methods like growing certain crops in your garden, having your crops in full sunlight so they're not getting too wet and they dry out a lot quicker. And then also planting spaces so that they have more air to kind of aerate and make sure things happen like that so that you're not getting that fungus and mildew. If you see it, a lot of times I'll just cut it out. Like if I have it on a leaf or something like that, I will get it out of there. And I think that's a really good method to use for a lot of damage or pests. And that's also part of the sanitation of your garden. So if you see something that's pest damage, try to get rid of it. Make sure you don't compost it with your normal compost or put it anywhere with like things you're gonna grow before. Just get rid of it. Otherwise that disease and those pests will come back after that season. Any questions? That's a lot of information to be throwing at y'all, I know, especially on a hot day like today, but I want to answer any specific questions that y'all have. Yes?
So I was talking about the squash probably actually was the Mexican bean.
Yes.
But so my question is, from a preventative standpoint, what is your recommendation for what I can spray on or use to kind of be ahead of the curve? Because they come every year.
Yeah, with the squash bugs? We could do an insecticidal soap. Do that. Insecticidal soap only works when you can spray it on the plant, again, later in the day, but it works best when you actually spray the pest itself when you see it, because then it's going to suffocate the bug. You can do that. One of the other methods for getting rid of squash bugs is literally pulling them off and smashing them and killing them, which sucks because, like you don't want to get your hands dirty. You can wear gloves and do that. Yeah, you can wear gloves to do that, but that's a great method to do. There are some certain brands, I think Spinosad is a organic pesticide that will work with those that you can use if the infestation becomes too much. While we're talking about organic and pesticides and whatnot, when you buy pesticides, you want to look for the OMRI label, OMRI. That is going to be essentially your organic label. There are also things that are going to be, say, organic methods and things like that, but OMRI is usually the best thing that you want to look for when you're using these products, because then you can actually continue to use them healthily and safely. So this is an insecticidal soap that's already pre-made. I want to show y'all how to actually make an insecticidal soap. so it's a little bit more cost effective to you. I've given you all the recipe on the handout. Super easy, super quick, and not that much effort or anything. You don't even probably have to go to the grocery store. The stuff that's in here is probably already in your house. So to make an insecticidal soap at home, I'm going to start off with a 1 cup of vegetable oil. You can actually use any type of oil for this, canola or whatever you have in your, probably wouldn't recommend olive oil. I think just like a cheap vegetable oil from Kroger or anything like that is a better option for you. So we're gonna pour this 1 cup. This is gonna be pretty much what's gonna coat the plant and keep it on the plant when we pour it in there. Hopefully I don't make too big of a mess, we'll see. We'll pour this right here. Cool. Okay, the next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna add 1 tablespoon of baking soda. Make sure you're using baking soda and not baking powder. Baking powder is a completely different chemical agent. You probably have both in your house if you do a lot of baking, but I have this in my refrigerator because, you know, it helps with like the scents and things like that. Let's see if this works. Awesome, awesome. Next thing we're going to use is going to be a dish soap. Make sure when you use a dish soap, you're not using anything that has bleach. Bleach is obviously going to damage your pests as well as adding unwanted chemicals in your garden. You could use Dawn, or I actually prefer to use, they're not sponsoring me, but I prefer to use Dr. Bronner's like Castile soap. It's a lot more gentle than the Dawn is, and you know for sure that it doesn't have any of those like harsh ingredients like bleach or anything in that for you. Unscented, but if you want to have a scent on it, you can do it as well. Like the peppermint probably be a good option too. I think that probably would deter a lot of pests if you have that. But I usually go with the unscented variety on that. All right. Next, we're going to do 2 teaspoons of water. And the apple cider vinegar is actually a optional ingredient for this. That's to add pretty much a scent if you want to deter pests as well. I'm going to put that in there. I'm going to do about 1 tablespoon of that. And then we'll add the water. Any questions for me thus far? Awesome. And then we'll add the water. And this is it. Then your insecticidal soap is absolutely done. And the last step that you want to in this is actually to agitate it, to shake it up as much as possible to get all those ingredients mixed together. And you also want to label your bottles as well with the date and what's actually in it. This will probably last about a week or so. So you want to use it as soon as possible if you can. Okay, and that's it. That's your insecticidal soap. So you have this ready and you can use this on target of any pest that you have, or I'm not gonna spray it right now. Obviously it's too early in the day. It will burn and possibly destroy a lot of the plants. So again, you wanna make sure that you're spraying the insecticidal soap later in the evening, closer to nighttime, so it's not getting that harsh sun. Before you actually use this or any products, I always recommend to actually spray a small area of a plant first, just to see what will happen to it, to make sure that it's not overly damaged or anything like that. You don't want to kill your plant, you just want to make sure that like it's getting everything that it needs for it. Okay. Any other questions for me? Yeah.
What is hort oil?
Oh yeah, horticultural oil. So that's going to be something that you can buy at a like a plant shop, Lowe's, Home Depot, whatever your preferred place, Pikes. You can use this, but it's used for a lot of different things. Scale, spider mites, and other pests as well. It can take care of that. But when you're using these products, I should actually have gloves on. It is OMRI certified, but you also still want to use gloves whenever dealing with any of these chemicals.
So do they need to be mixed with something, or
The hort oil can be mixed. You can make like a organic fungicide. That recipe's on here as well, or you can use it solo by itself. And someone else had a question?
after the garden looks like that,
Yeah, that just depends on what your gardening space is like. You definitely want to, when using any chemicals or anything like that, you definitely, after you harvest the plants, you want to wash it. You could do that in like a dunk tank. You can buy like a easy, like a little tub and just put your vegetables in that, dunk it. Or you can do it in your kitchen sink using like the hose and spraying it off like that as well. Typically you can use probably like a little bit of apple cider vinegar as well. I know some folks who use apple cider vinegar, and I've been seeing a lot of TikToks where they use apple cider vinegar and baking soda to clean stuff, which is really fun to watch, but I don't necessarily know if that really does anything. But you can use that. They also sell commercially like veggie wash and things like that. And I think as well, I've seen recently like a machine that you throw in the water that actually cleans it as well. So it's just your preferred method to do that. Typically, I think a little bit of apple cider vinegar and just washing it does the job. But if you want to go a little bit more thorough, you can look into other options for that as well. Yes. It just depends. You want to dilute it with water just so you don't like affect the taste. It depends on how big of area you're washing or what you're using. If you're using your sink and you're doing a bunch of veggies at once, I would say go anywhere between like 1 tablespoon and 2 tablespoons depending on the amount of water in there. You're welcome. Yes.
When you use the insecticidal soap, do you have to come back behind it with like water to like wash it off? Because I know you talked about the burning of the plant. You can do it in the daytime, but even in the evening, like once the sun comes back up, do you have to go back behind it?
No, typically you don't. What will happen is probably that it's going to either get washed away or it's just going to come off on itself. So like in the morning time, if you left it on there all day, that's when you would get exposed to all the sun and problems. But overnight, it's not going to be a big issue for you. A lot of times with insecticidal soap, it's not going to last for more than like a day on there. So I think you should be fine. But washing your vegetables after you've harvested them will be a good option as well.
I would also just add,
Yeah.
you want to be careful about how often you're using it, because I think continued repeated usage on it, like you want to use it as needed, but not overuse it. That can make it.
Right. And that goes for any of the chemical measures that we use for gardening. You want to use them sparingly, only as listed on the label. You don't want to go too wild with it, because if you do, then that's going to really affect your garden. So using efforts to do more like mechanical and biological controls, as well as cultural things, those are going to be your big ways to stop pests from really taking over your garden. And that's about my time. I know it's hot, and I really appreciate y'all for sitting out here in the sun and listening to me talk today. It's absolutely fantastic. Before we go, I do have for y'all some things that you can take with y'all. On the table back there where the brown paper sacks are, I have some magnifying glasses for y'all. This is a great way to walk around your garden to check and identify pests. If you have like little ones in your family, they will love to do this with y'all, so you can use those to actually identify the pests in your garden, take pictures of those. And there are lots of resources on the handout I gave you in order to contact county extension agents or just finding more information. IPM, again, is going to be a cyclical process. This is going to be something that you're going to be continually learning and researching. But if you're gardening, you're farming, I don't think y'all are strangers to hard work. So I really appreciate y'all's time today. Thank y'all very much. If you would like to join me for a bug hunt a little later, please feel free to do so. Or if I think, Frank, y'all have a lot of vegetables y'all giving away as well?
Yes. Let's give Brandon a hand, everybody. All right. All right.
Thank you, sir.
Fantastic. As Brandon said, we do have some handouts here. We actually have veggies that were picked this morning.
Yes, ma'am.
Cucumbers, peppers, all sorts of vegetables. And we're going to hand those out as we come over here. And also Food Well Alliance has some things over here as well. We know that you are in the sun. Let me say a quick prayer to get you out that sun. May we bow our head. Heavenly Father, we come to you at this time with thanksgiving, thanking you for allowing us to have this event. We ask, Heavenly Father, that you give us traveling grace and mercy. Cover each and one of us and our families under the precious blood of Jesus. These things we ask in Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Come on over.
Thank you again, folks.